Hey everybody, I just wanted to do a video here to maybe remind everybody a little bit about how prophecy tends to work in the Bible. And um, I don't know if what I'm going to say here rises to the level of what people would call a hermeneutic, but I think of it that way myself anyways. Here's the premise or the rule of thumb. Um, Prophecy is sort of like a historical narrative written in advance. And a historical narrative, I've mentioned this several times, basically it's just a story about how something happens, you know, event over event over event, meaning, if you wake up in the morning and you shower and you brush your teeth and you go to breakfast and then you go to work, you go to lunch, whatever, it's event after event after event. And historical narrative means we're telling that story about what happened in the past. Now, the premise that I think is a good working premise for the Bible, especially prophetic passages, is what you're getting a historical narrative written in advance. Um, the most famous one, I think, and we covered this in prior video, is Daniel 11. I think in the first 35 verses, people have counted, I think, up to 135 discrete fulfilled prophecies that occurred between the reign of Alexander the Great and um, I guess it would be the rise of the Roman Empire. And they're all very ordered, very structured, and it matched exactly the way history worked. And I think that's a good rule of thumb when looking at prophecy. And I'm doing this video today because I'm noticing, especially with uh, videos and commentary that are going out onto YouTube, where all this is setting, people are jumping all over the place and they're saying, we're at the end of the fifth seal judgment waiting for the sixth seal to open, or um, you know, we're we're everywhere and say, the videos I did the other day with Isaiah 19, um, pulling out any possible thing out of these passages and more or less randomly. And so I just want to go through here, do a couple of examples, and make the point, and we'll end with Revelation 6, where we see those sealed judgments, and just wrap it up there. So this is going to be a short video, but I think it's an important one. Keep everybody on their toes about what they're seeing in terms of Bible prophecy videos out on the internet. So I'm starting here in Daniel 2, and I'm not going to read all this down. I just want to familiarize and remind people of how prophecy is laid out in the book. And so I'm choosing a couple of very famous prophetic passages just to more or less to remind you rather than to go drain the whole thing. And so in Daniel 2, we've got this vision that the king had in a dream, and it was King Nebuchadnezzar, and he was very upset because of what he saw, and none of his soothsayers could interpret the dream for him, and fortunately Daniel was able to interpret the dream. And so he's talking about uh, Nebuchadnezzar said, not only do you have to interpret the dream, you have to tell me what it was. And so here's Daniel saying, thou, O king, sawest, behold, a great image. The great image whose brightness was excellent stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of fine gold, his breast and arms were silver, his belly and thighs of brass, his legs of iron, and then his feet part iron and part clay. And it's a very famous passage, so we don't have to spend too much time on. Oh, I better read the next verse. Thou sawest till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and break them into pieces. And so the interpretation here, without going through the whole thing, is this is just a representation of all the Gentile world dominant empires that were to exist between the time Nebuchadnezzar had this vision until the second coming of Christ. And so in the interpretation uh, that was given, it's, Daniel's saying, hey, Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head of gold, um, right here, the image of fine gold. And then the next empire coming, the Medo-Persian Empire, was represented by the arms and chest of silver, and then his belly and thighs were brass. That was Alexander the Great in the Grecian Empire. And then his legs of iron was the Roman Empire that came in. And then here's where you get, Roman Empire never really went away. It degraded and fizzled into what we see now in the EU on the western leg, and then what we see in sort of the Islamic countries and the Fertile Crescent on the right-hand side of the leg. And what we get in the end times part that people are watching right now is a feet that are partly iron, so partly of the old, and then partly of clay, which this is baked brittle clay. And there's a lot of speculation exactly what that means, where that's because the EU is done on treaties, or the west side of the Roman Empire doesn't work well with the Muslim east side, all sorts of interpretations there. And then what you get is a stone that was cut without hands. And Jesus and the pre-incarnate Jesus in the Bible in the Old Testament is referred to as the stone. Um, and so what we see here in the Old Testament is the a reference to Jesus coming. It wasn't made with, hands, meaning he wasn't human in his creation. He was virgin birth, born by God, right? And he smote the image on his feet, and he broke the whole thing into pieces, and then, they blow away here in the next verse. And so the point is this is very chronological. Even though it's prophetic passage, it's imagery, all that. It's Babylonian Empire from 605 BC to 539 BC, Medo-Persian Empire from 539 BC down to I forget four. Oh, I'm drawing a blank. Apologize on that. Uh, 330, I think it was 333 BC. And then the Grecian Empire from 330 BC and down to was 184 or whatever, the Roman Empire, and down and down and down. And then we get basically the second coming here with Christ smashing the final on the feet. So on the feet, smashing at the final world dominant empire and breaking it into pieces. And so whatever this final empire is, it's the world dominant one of the Antichrist, and the second coming of Christ smashes it. So you get the linear progression of this narrative that's being told. Okay, so there's one example. Let's go, I'm just picking on famous passages so people can just see, yep, this is how it kind of works. And now I skipped out of the King James Version only because I'm not going to read it to you. I'm just going to read the headers on this one, but I want to share the point again, which is another famous one starts in Ezekiel, let's say in 36 here, and it's referencing a swath of time about what's going to happen to the Jewish people. And so it starts with this prophesy to the mountains of Israel, and basically, he's going to talk about, he's going to crush the Israel people, make them desolate, push them out of the land. Okay, that's the first part of it. And then the Lord says, after you've been pushed out of the land, I'm going to feel sorry for you. I'm going to remember my covenants, and he's going to want to draw them back. And as he draws them back and brings them into their own land, he's going to put his spirit within them. So that's that chunk of text. And then the next chapter is actually continuing this same progression. And so in 37, we're into this visionary kind of language, but it's the same thing. It's this Valley of Dry Bones vision where the nation of Israel, especially coming out of the Holocaust, was completely, you know, decimated and starved out by Hitler and whatever, and they're being brought back, and that's what the imagery is here. And, behold, there was sinews and flesh came upon them, the skin covered them. You can see, but there was no breath in them, meaning there was no spirit in them. And so you can see that, yeah, the nation of Israel is being restored and actually brought back into its land, but it's missing something. It's coming back apostate, is what we see here in 37. Um, and then God's reclaiming them here, and when he reclaims them back into the land, he said it's not going to be as of old where there was a northern part of Israel and a southern. He's now making reference it's going to be one stick or one combined people back in the land, and that's exactly what happened, right? And so the linear progression is following forward. And now this is the real famous set of prophecies that we think are just around the corner, and then we have this war that's defined in Ezekiel 38 and then in 39. And again, it's a progression. It talks about he's going to bring Russia with this aligned set of what are current day Muslim or Islamic nations to come against Israel. It's this horrific thing, and then as they come down on the mountaintops into Israel, we see that God himself puts a stop to it and kills off all the armies on the mountains of Israel. And then he talks about at the very end of this, the restoration of Israel spiritually. And so, financially and spiritually after this occurs. And so that he will not hide his face from them anymore, and he'll pour out his spirit upon the house of Israel. And a lot of people see the way that this closes as the coming back Israel from their apostate spiritual state to recognizing God and looking again at the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as real. And so 36 through 38, they're all linear progression, or 39, all linear progression, and actually you could push this all the way forward, 40, 41, 42, all the way up to 48, starts talking about the restoration of the Jewish temple and all. So this whole swath is linear progression, just like a historical narrative, except it was written in advance. And we've seen a good half of this fulfilled, 36 and 37, and we're looking forward to 38 and 39 around the corner. I'm going to say the same thing, and you can go read all sorts of commentaries about Isaiah, but I personally think this is clear, although Isaiah is tough prophetically to know when he's talking about near-term versus future fulfillment. But I'll just make this broad comment. Isaiah 24 through 27 is called the little apocalypse. And again, I'm not going to read any of this to you. I took the English Standard Version only to just show that the topic is judgment on the whole earth. God will swallow up death forever after the judgment happens, okay? And then, you'll live in perfect peace. And since Isaiah was writing to the Jewish people, the promise is being that the Jewish people will live with God in their land. And here in 26, you see the restoration of the Jewish people, and that's reinforced with the redemption of Israel. So again, a linear progression. Isaiah is way more difficult, but I just want to plant that in your head that that's the way you look for it. Now, we just did this Egypt in the End Times series of videos in the last couple of days, and I'm not going to go repeat that. But when I was going through it, I was trying to order them. And again, it's not that there isn't anything open for debate. There sure is. The first things you see is that the idols in Egypt are moved at God's presence. And we took a look at spinning idols that occurred in the museum in Cairo. We looked at the what sure appears to be ghostly artifacts of a rider on a pale horse riding through the crowd during the Arab Spring uprising. And then you get this Egyptian, verse 2, Egyptians fighting against Egyptians, and it moves into neighborhoods, then cities, and then kingdoms. Well, some of this you could say was happening during the Arab Spring, but I guess, in all fairness, it hadn't escalated to the point where the cities and the kingdoms were fighting against each other. But what do we see today? Just 2 years after the Arab Spring and 1 year after uh, Morsi and the Muslim Brotherhood get into office, there's 14 million people, I guess it was estimated, are back in the streets, and Morsi says he's not going to step down, and the people are and the military are threatening a military coup. And today is July 2nd. Who knows, how far away that is? But that definitely, if that kind of a clash occurred, these statements would have literal fulfillment at that point. And so, you know, that's uh, that's the way I like to look at it. Now, um, we'll also know at that point, if uh, Morsi is the fierce king and the cruel lord, which is also prophesied in here. Um, and we'll know, I guess, a little bit more where exactly we fell in this set of texts. And that's why yesterday I kept saying, yeah, I'm trying to place these in order. I'm trying to place these in order. It's right upon us now, and it's sort of playing out. And so, I said we were before this verse 6 here, the rivers have not dried up yet and the waters haven't failed. So, I felt like I'm pretty sure we're before that, and I was speculating, are we here in terms of verse 4? Is Muhammad Mercy that fierce king and cruel lord? And so here's where, there's room for debate until it truly becomes history and it's behind us. We won't know, uh, you know, exactly where we are, but we've got a sense, and we can anticipate is the way I would say that it's going to proceed forward in a linear fashion. And that's why when these rivers dry up and all that, some people say, well, that was the Aswan Dam that was built in Egypt, whenever that was, back in the 70s. And I would say no, that kind of breaks this linear progression flow. I think we're going to see this happen on a go forward basis. And then we talked about at the end, not only does the economy fail, but all of Egypt, gets desolated. And then we got all these comments down below, I think, about the 40-year dispersion from the land. And we picked that up again, saw it again in Daniel 11. And Daniel 11, same scenario, but it was clearly in the 7 years of tribulation where, the king of the south, as it was referenced, which is Egypt in context, is desolated in that passage. And so that's how we line these passages together. So that's that comment about Isaiah 19. If people are already, way down here picking up passages midway through, I would say, maybe. I mean, you can see you can see prophecy coming in advance, but it isn't necessarily the fulfillment yet. And I think that's a huge mistake that's made. Just like we see the signs of the tribulation period right now, and they're very obvious. The rapture itself, for instance, has always been a signless event. Paul expected it in his day. So if there was signs to be watched for, Paul wouldn't expect it, right? But now we know it's very close because we're seeing the signs of the tribulation and the second coming. We can't say that they've happened already, but we can see the signs of them, and so we know we're close. And I think that's a better context to put on some of these. You can see signs of, that the rivers will fail because of the new dam that's being talked about in Ethiopia. You can imagine here how the whole economy collapses because they're already in turmoil and they're very dependent on the river and the delta for their economy. You can imagine that whole thing collapsing, and you can see the early edge of that right now, but you can't say these prophecies are fulfilled yet later down in Isaiah 19. Okay, so beat that one to death. And the last one that's really out there and everybody is chasing this and it's just frustrating is Revelation 6 is in the time of the 7-year tribulation. And when we did our study um, of the timelines for the slides 1, 2, and 3, went through pretty careful, and we talked about how the church is pictured in heaven in Revelation 4 and in Revelation 5. And at the end of Revelation 5, you actually start seeing the verses where the dispensation is changing and God's focus comes back to the Jewish people. And you see that with the names that Christ takes for himself at the end of Revelation 5. He's the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and I forget there's another one, but it's very Jewish, and it's very much taking ownership for his kingship over the tribes of Israel, meaning the church age has ended. Church is in heaven. Transition, dispensation, back to finish the final 7 years of God dealing with the Jewish people as he promised in the Daniel 70-week prophecy. Okay, so I bring that up now because then moving forward in our historical narrative, Revelation's laid out, I'll argue, and so do many Bible scholars, in a linear progression, even though there's a lot of symbolic language, just like we saw in Daniel 2, a lot of symbolic language. There's a lot of additional commentary, like in Revelation 7, Revelation 10 through 14 is our commentary passages at the midpoint of the tribulation, but it's a linear progression moving forward, okay? So in 6, again, I'm not going to read the whole thing. You get the 4 horsemen coming out, and you have starvation and all this occurring. Well, certainly there's starvation in the land in different places around the world, but this is serious starvation. This is global in scope, and everybody is living here a quart of wheat for a denarius and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. That's a day's wages. And then this do not harm the oil and wine. It's a reference to there's going to be an elite controlling class that are going to have the oil, the wine, the luxury, and then the whole rest of the world is going to be living hand to mouth. And then the other reason why we know we're not in these sealed judgments yet is very literal here. We're in verse 7 of Revelation 6. And they were given authority over 1/4 of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and pestilence and by wild beasts of the earth. So you can't tell me that has happened. 1/4 of the earth, whatever that is, billion, some 100 million people are not dead from the 4 horsemen judgment coming across the earth. Death in Hades has not shown up in the level of 1 billion, some 100 million people coming on earth. And then you get down to the 5th seal, and you see some more. And then finally in the 6th seal, things start to get supernatural, and we see the moon becoming, sun becoming as black as sackcloth, and the moon not giving, moon turning to blood. Okay, so and so none of that has happened yet. And so if you're watching videos and they're talking about, oh, the 3rd seal's been opened and we're into the 4th seal, or the 5th seal has happened, we're waiting for the 6th seal, and they're looking for the sun to go dark or whatever, they're way off pace. The church needs to be in heaven first in Revelation 4, worshiping Christ as the King. The Bema seat's got to happen. All sorts of stuff first. And so I guess there's a bit of a rant, but I'm trying to put it in the context of the way prophecy is written in the Bible. It's a historical narrative written in advance. So thanks for watching and putting up with me, and feel free to leave me comments down below.